social media was giving people who didn't really have a platform. Someone does something that's considered wild or extreme. Well, yeah, reporters are going to reach out to you, and then your platform expands. What is most attention grabbing are those like zingers, the jabs, the things that boil people down to motivations that are probably not even there. We are seeing that and viewing that as an acceptable way to behave, to talk to politicians. When you lose the ability to have discourse or try to approach things in a respectful way, you're really kind of chipping away at the opportunity to like make progress.
What's a swimming in the Frogmore stew? South Carolina in the Frogmore stew. Yeah.
Hey, it's Grace. This is Frogmore Stew. Today I am with a new friend. Her name is Sarah Massey. She is a fairly new South Carolinian coming to us from Washington, D.C. And I'm really excited to talk to her today. And I think you'll find her super fascinating, particularly her time spent in D.C. Sarah, welcome to Frogmore Stew.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks. Yeah. So welcome to South Carolina. I know that you're fairly new, not brand new, but fairly new. And you come to us from Washington, D.C. You will get into what you did in D.C. You currently have a company called Rising Tide Strategies, which does communications, media relations, and crisis management. You come to that position with extensive experience on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
So on Capitol Hill, you were communications director for the Ways and Means Committee and media relations director for two Republican speakers of the House, John Boehner and Paul Ryan. I'm from Ohio, so John Boehner always sticks out to me.
Very nice. Very beloved in Ohio.
Very beloved in Ohio, always smoking a cigarette and often cutting his grass. He's a big yard guy is what I've gained from, One of the lines that stood out to me in your bio says that you served as senior strategic counsel to clients navigating crises, congressional scrutiny, and sensitive policy debates. So for anyone that doesn't remember either John Boehner or Paul Ryan, they went through a whole host of what would be considered crises, congressional scrutiny, and sensitive policy debates. I feel like with that title, you were the probably busiest person in DC. Can you just give us sort of a brief overview of your day-to-day in doing those jobs?
Yes. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head of saying when you're working for the Speaker of the House, everything is a news story and often not one you can control.
Right.
And when I was working up there, it seems like decades and decades ago, but between 2008 and like 2018, which doesn't sound that long ago, but was a very different time in politics.
Right.
We had a big communications team supporting the speaker, but part of my job was essentially to make sure whatever was happening inside the Capitol building made sense to people outside of the Capitol building.
Right.
And supporting all of their external events. So that would be TV interviews, press conferences, visits from dignitaries, different heads of states, major town halls, you name it. And kind of what I was saying before is there was a lot we can control. You're in charge of the Capitol building. You're the figurehead for the political party, especially if, the president at the time is from a different party. But there was also, again, much that you couldn't control because you had over 200 members who were in your party who could free will their own opinions, things they wanted to say or do, and a platform to say it.
Yeah.
And also whatever the president of the United States, whomever that was at the time, would say or do or bring up. So I think I tell people who ask me about my time on the Hill, I said every day was a crisis, but it didn't feel like you were always living through a crisis. You were navigating kind of what you could control in the moment and really trying to drive a larger narrative of what stories you told, who you were telling them to, how you actually responded when things went sideways. So that was a big part of the job, and no day looked the same.
Yeah, for sure. And you were there, 2008 to 2018. So you were there working for a Republican speaker during Obama's term, and then also working for a Republican speaker for part of Trump's term.
Yes.
That was Paul Ryan. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit more. But I want to start sort of by backing up. Like, can you give us an understanding of the layers underneath what we as just political consumers, as constituents, as citizens of this country see? Because I feel like it's sort of like a rock star or a movie star where you see the final product, but we have no idea the team, the management, the social media team, the assistants. And really, when you started social media, 2008, social media wasn't even that much of a consideration, right? And so can you give us an understanding of, for the Speaker of the House, for example, who is a member of, who has to get elected by his constituents, so he's actually a House member, plus goes on to become this important job of the Speaker. What does the team behind him look like?
Yeah, I think it's actually very interesting because so many offices look very, very different. And when I was working at the Speaker of the House, they made a real concerted effort under Boehner to professionalize every part of the operation. And a big part of that was communications. As you said, like social media was expanding, the way people consumed news, the types of outlets, the partisanship in news, all of that was coming to a head in what it felt like the exact same time.
Yeah.
And I think that's the norm for a lot of people now. They just think that's the baseline, but that was a very rapidly evolving phenomenon in media and in politics. So, if I can walk through the comms operation. The White House team often has like hundreds of people on their communications team. We don't have that opportunity to do that in the Speaker of the House, but really taking on that responsibility that this person needs to be the lead communicator for the House, for the party sometimes. Professionalized it in a way where we kind of came together realizing all of the different narratives and strategies we needed to drive to try to reach people. There's a big balance of, you're trying to reach the American people, but you also have 100 other constituencies of people who are in your party, people who are working in different industries and have a stake in the game of what piece of legislation is passing. So you're kind of delicately maneuvering all of these different, I guess, stakeholders or constituencies while remaining true to kind of like your North Star.
Yeah.
So for us, we had about a team of 10 and we all played different roles, but came together every single morning for kind of a quick huddle.
When you say 10 people, that's specific to the comms?
Just
the
for
comms
communications.
Team, and how do you because the comms team also has to work in tandem with everyone else, right? And so who are those other people that you're talking to on a daily basis to make sure that all the messaging that's getting out is accurate and also the right way to say it?
Yeah, that's a great question because it sounds like there would be a formal process, but that was the best part of working in a beautiful building in small quarters, is you had to go and stand in front of someone's desk and hash things out every single morning. And I feel like that's an underappreciated skill in the era of remote work. But oftentimes he had a large policy team where everybody who had their specific policy expertise, we'd be touching base on what are the issues of the day, working with their chief of staff and other people kind of in that like executive leadership of what's driving the news, what's driving the issues, what bills are on the floor, what news is breaking, what just has happened geopolitically, and kind of getting a little bit of a read from everybody in the room. So we knew where we needed to be aligned, what might have shifted from the day before. What that looked like varied from day to day. It's 15-minute check-ins. It's a huddle in a room for an hour based off of the breaking news of the day. And then again, mapping out what his schedule looked like and knowing, okay, where is he going to run into a reporter? Where do we have a press conference? Did we schedule an interview and now there's like major breaking news? Or often a huge consideration is we want to shape the story. How can we do that? And what like are the strategies and tactics we need to do? And I think one thing that people might not realize is The Capitol building is a public building. So while our offices, everyone had to have a badge to get in there. You had to be pre-screened. Pretty much you would walk, it's much smaller than you think. You can walk through the halls and you'd run into a tour of constituents looking at the rotunda. You'd see reporters that you're used to seeing on TV tapping your shoulder and asking you a question about something that the president might have just tweeted.
Yeah.
You run into 3 members of Congress who pull on your shoulder and say, hey, what about that piece of legislation I wanted passed? Or I want to get on this committee. And so a quick stroll in the hallway can also be fraught with complications or opportunities.
Which is good and bad, right? Yeah, right. Complications or opportunities. And so I want to touch on something you said a minute ago of messaging. For someone on the ground like me, I'm not a political insider. I read the news, I watch the shows, I'm on all the socials. But I want to understand, like, outside of the political bubble, how did you work, or how do the people you worked for keep a grasp on what's going on outside of DC? Because I do feel like we see them fighting on TV and we see them saying things against each other on the news, but that's the bubble of DC. And so how did they really understand this is legislation I think is important, and so I'm going to put it out? But if the sentiment on the ground, was there sentiment on the ground that they heard from? Like, how did you navigate understanding the differences in the needs and political understanding in the various regions of the country versus just the bubble of DC?
I mean, one of the most important things that when I was working for Speaker Boehner, he was like, the members have to go home. They need to go home. They need to get out of DC. That's why they call it recess. It sounds very fun, but they go home. They're taking the constituent meetings. They're going to their in-district offices. Back in that day, they were doing a lot of town halls, and you'd hear directly from those folks. And then they'd bring that back to either their staff, and their staff would share it with the offices. Like, it was a little bit of a grassroots. Members would hear, they'd share it with their committee, they'd share it with the speaker himself, because every district looks so different. And what somebody might be hearing in Ohio might look very different than what they're hearing in South Florida. So ensuring that people kept a pulse on that. The other thing is, and I always tell this, and as someone who's worked in an advocacy organization, calling your members, writing a letter, all of those direct outreach, it really does matter. They pay attention to it. They have to read it. They look to it. Hopefully you've received a response if you've done that.
Yep.
And in the speaker's office, we actually had a team of 4, we call them staff assistants, but they were essentially full-time on the phones answering calls, because we had a direct number from constituents around the country and logging what issues were coming up. Obviously, sometimes you can tell when there's like a bill about to be on the floor, you'll get hundreds and hundreds of calls. There's a big advocacy push, and telling that we get a phone call saying, hey, we're getting a lot of phone calls about this. What should we be saying in response? This is a new issue for us. So we actually did keep the constituent calls in the communications office. We're in a direct line to each other. And it was also important for us to know what was driving people's attention. Are they really paying attention to this? Even though just because it's in the headlines doesn't mean most Americans care.
That's right.
So trying to figure out that balance of being responsive and not reactive. And it is a really delicate balance, but that's where you see where members will just touch with their district, they're often in a little bit of electoral trouble a year or two later.
And were there specific voices or incidents or movements from outside of DC, outside of those phone calls, that affected how any of the people you worked for moved in their opinions or understandings of what? Can you think of an example where, like, somebody was at the grocery store or an advocacy group did some sort of stunt? Or is there anything that really moved the needle while you were there?
That's a great question. I mean, it felt like so many things were happening every day that it's like hard to catalog what might have actually moved the needle. I do feel like it's the personal stories that often hit people the hardest. So if a member is at a diner, or they're at a town hall, or they're at the grocery store, and someone comes up and he either tells them an experience that they had that was either positive or negative around something that they worked on, it really sticks with them. And those are often the stories that either can help motivate you to push something forward or they can make you take a step back and realize like the different ways that the policies that you're working on day to day can impact people's lives for better or for worse. And I think that was like a big part of that is just remembering like who is at the heart of it. Because the challenge when you're in DC is it's a swirl and you're talking about legislative text. You're talking about who said what reporter is calling you. And the people who are most successful at this are the people who stay grounded in like the stories of the people that you're actually trying to impact, the change you're actually trying to make. And I mean, I think not just separate to your question, I was up there when the Tea Party movement, which seems like, again, something long ago, came about. And that was the first, I feel like, grassroots movement that was really pushing on the political trade winds. It wasn't always about a specific policy, but they were kind of trying to be a check and balance to everything that was going on in DC. And you'll probably remember like the photos from people in like the colonial wear and actually going to Tea Party protests. And I remember I was quite young on the Hill and being in meetings and members saying, we have Tea Party constituents. They're showing up at everything. They're saying this, like they're making their voice heard. And sometimes the loudest voice in the room is not always right, but sometimes it's also the most persuasive. So that was a really interesting movement that
they changed politics
on many forms. Yeah,
I bet they changed a party from one thing to another. I mean, I think they moved the needle in a way that changed politics. I mean, we are definitely feeling the brunt of it today. One other subject I want to discuss a little bit more is it definitely feels when you read the quotes and you watch the clips that the messaging is very coordinated. It definitely feels the right is much better at coordinating their messaging than the left is. And the right, I think, has been better at being trusted messengers or qualified messengers to the people that they're speaking to than the left has. Do your political beliefs, when you're crafting a message for the person you're working for, do your political beliefs ever play a role in what that message is? Or is it sort of like if you're an interior designer and your taste can't be influenced by you have to do what your client wants. And is that the case with the job that you had, or is it sort of a room full of everybody's beliefs and then you meld that into one?
That's a very interesting question, and actually one I think a lot of people like struggle with in that staff and member level relationship is you're there to advance the members' political priorities, beliefs, and sometimes those go in the same direction and sometimes you feel at conflict. And especially when you're writing things in someone else's voice or thinking through of how they should frame something, I would be lying if I would say it's hard not to put a little bit of yourself into that. I was never a speechwriter. Some of the best speechwriters, you would never even know that these presidents or speakers had speechwriters because you would think, wow, this sounds so much like them. And at the end of the day, that's the goal. But I think too, part of it is they have staff to counsel them on who we're trying to reach. Again, like putting the audience in the shoes. Who are the people we're really trying to talk to? What are the messages that are going to make them feel connected to what we're saying? And making sure that those messages align with the political or policy priorities that we actually have. Yeah. And I do think some of that is shifted from really like thoughtful, tangible messages, conversations, like really you would see some of these long form interviews and they would be really revelatory and you could connect with the person regardless of political party or what the issue they're talking about. Yeah. I think now a lot of what you're seeing in political communication is extremely high level. It punches at the emotion first and then uses that emotion to kind of hook people into feeling convinced by the policy. Yeah. And that is can be a very effective way to communicate. But I also feel like you're seeing people start to feel a little tired or like the wool's being pulled over their head, that big overtures or big statements. Okay, well, what's really behind that?
Right.
And it's actually refreshing because I feel like for a while, you could say anything. And as long as you had an R or a D next to your name, it depended, people wouldn't care.
Because it's identity. People's identity have become attached. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the identity politics is it was growing as I was there.
Yeah.
And that became an increasing part where, to your point, it didn't matter who was speaking. They were all going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's not how there's no nuance in that. And that's not how democracy works.
Right.
It's not black and white. So I think that I'm hoping we're kind of like slowly bending the curve to having more thoughtful, deliberative, like connective conversations that account for the nuance that politics is evolving and something you should be informed by and challenged by, but it's not who you are too.
Yeah. Well, I also think, and it's interesting that you were there sort of from the start of social media and through like its impacts, because I feel like what social media has done is opened up all of us up into our inner selves. And it feels like the people that we used to hold in high regard, and we didn't see all the inner workings of who they are and their temper tantrums and all the things that they did. We never used to see that. And so now everyone feels very comfortable because we see all these inner workings of people through social media, just saying whatever you want because you feel like you know them in some sense. I hope this is peak of where we've hit with social media. Like, I don't know that it is because of AI, but I feel like you just said, people are starting to see through the big picture stuff that people are promising and asking for, like, what's the actual action behind what you're promising? And that's where social media is coming in. Does that make sense? Is that all coming together in a way that makes sense?
Yes, it exacerbated something. When I was working with Speaker Boehner, he used to always say, we can disagree without being disagreeable. So you can have different viewpoints. You can want to talk about those, but that doesn't mean you have to question their underlying motivations, who they are as a person, and take personal jabs. And I think President Obama used to say that phrase too. And it's an important one that I think got lost over time because the incentive structures around social media pushed people to extremes, even if they themselves weren't in that extreme. And you see it because social media was giving people who didn't really have a platform to either go after their opponent, whether it's in one political party or another. To go after somebody within their own party, to talk about breaking news issues and kind of put their own spin or take on it. And when I was up on the Hill, if you were a freshman member, you weren't getting booked TV interviews, you weren't getting the prime committee spots, but social media gave people, whether you were a freshman member or you'd been there for 10 years, and it gave you an opportunity to make a name for yourself. And you see it on social media. If someone does something that's considered wild or extreme, well, reporters are going to reach out to you, and then your platform expands, and then more people know your name. And then I think too, it gets into what is most attention grabbing are those like zingers, the jabs, the things that boil people down to motivations that are probably not even there. And on the flip side is like, we, as the people on the receiving end of that, are seeing that and viewing that as an acceptable way to behave, to talk to politicians. And I think when you lose the ability to have discourse or try to approach things in a respectful way, you're really kind of chipping away at the opportunity to like make progress or have an informed discussion or make someone come along with you. Politics is about persuasion. It's not a rubber stamp of yes or no. And I think it's disheartening to see that too. And you see with the increase in threats against members, like people are just viewing them as like commodities, and that just because you're on a public platform means I can do or say whatever I want to. But on the flip side, the incentives of social media have created this warped world too. And you get rewarded with the likes or the phone call, or maybe you get your own podcast or whatever it may be out of it. So that is a really interesting phenomenon, one that was growing. And I think kind of like, chipped away at the form and function of democracy when people are performing constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, politics is always a performance, but.
Well, and I think because there's so much content out there, everyone's trying to stand out in their own way. And part of that is by being provocative and being over the top. And the way that you do that, the way you get, everyone wants their voice to be heard. And so the way that you get 1 million views is to do something very provocative. And that is not pushing anything forward or pulling anyone to your side. And I think where many people have lost the plot of politics is that your policy should be about bringing more people with you, support what your view is, versus getting 1 million likes on Instagram. And I think that's part of where we've lost the plot a little bit. From your time in DC to what is going on now, does it feel like anything is different? Because watching it from afar, it feels very, very different. Or do you think it is just business as usual going on there and we're just seeing sort of a sensationalized view of it?
I think it's probably both. What you're seeing on TV is going to be the most extreme of what is happening. But I do feel like from my time there is, when I first started on the Hill, it was quite common for Republicans and Democrats to produce legislation, to have meetings together, to maybe be roommates on Capitol Hill, the whole widespread range of, yes, we're on different parties, we may vote different ways, but at the end of the day, we can build a friendship and have a great conversation. And even too, I remember when I was working for Speaker Boehner, he would have strike up conversations with Bernie Sanders all the time. Very different political parties, very different viewpoints, but they both respected each other. They both understood that there were strong core beliefs in their motivations. And that I think that started getting a little bit lost as more new people came to Congress. They felt like that wasn't the way of working. And people felt like it was almost like sports teams. Like you can't tell the other team what we're doing. Everything has to be a secret. Kind of, it's not a win-loss. It's thinking through that, I believe, has changed a lot. And over the years, and especially after I left, it's really pulled more people into their kind of shells. And the people who do try to work together to try to stand up for certain issues, and maybe even like flip on a vote, they get punished for that. And there are really strong disincentives to speaking out. And it's unfortunate. And there's some people who are really courageous and brave. But I've heard many people saying this is the most divisive time in history. And someone once reminded me, we had duels on the House floor at one point. Like, we might not be in the most divisive time. It certainly feels like that in recent history. But there are ebbs and flows. And I think the important thing is to stay grounded to what matters to you outside of the headlines. Because in the day-to-day, most people are going about their job, picking up their kids from school, going to soccer practice, and trying to do the best that they can in their lives. And what the headline might be or what someone may have said for the day is the least of their concern. And so kind of that recentering and the regrounding has been important to me too.
Yeah. What I think, as having watched it pretty closely for the last 8 years, I was not like a hyper political person prior to 8 years ago. And I think what really has changed for me is that I don't ever remember in my lifetime of politics a politician telling the world that the other party is the devil, or is using the language that Trump uses for the Democrats. I don't ever remember hearing the two parties. Like, there's a great John McCain clip where he's running for president and someone says something about Obama not being a Muslim or something. And he stops her and he's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I may disagree with his policies, but he is a good man. And I don't I don't know, other than Trump loving Mamdani, that I have seen him say anything. I mean, sometimes he references that his son-in-law Jarrett is a Democrat, but he's really upped the rhetoric and been very successful at using Twitter and social media and building his brand. I mean, that's what his whole career has been, building his brand. And he's been very successful at creating this like good versus evil. And I just don't remember it being quite that heated. Like, I feel like Boehner and Obama were very friendly.
Right. I think it's an unfortunate phenomenon because when you have the person with the biggest platform in the world doing that, it kind of is like carte blanche for everyone else to do it.
Yeah.
And you've seen that trickle down, and you've seen people on both sides use it as a tactic, and it's sensationalizing. It can be successful in some ways. It can be very dangerous in a lot of ways. And I think it's really unfortunate when you see it trickle down to like people in their everyday lives and viewing people who don't believe in the same things as them as an actual opponent or as evil or as like, trying to like, whatever your label may be. I think that's what's really unfortunate, because you shouldn't meet somebody on the street and said, "Oh yeah, I'm a Republican," and immediately dismiss them. And vice versa. You should not meet someone on the street who said, "Oh, I really like Mamdani," and immediately dismiss them. I think like at the end of the day, people have the same core motivations, and your beliefs and your interests can evolve, and maybe they're more strongly held, and maybe you can disagree with that person. But to write people off or call them names, I mean, we teach our children better than that.
Yeah.
We teach, and if you saw your children using this language, you would be just absolutely appalled. So why should we as adults and parents or humans use that? It's just
accept that. Yeah.
And I hope there will be a tide shift on that. I also think there are people who just find it entertainment value, the unfortunate part of it. And whether that'll stick, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball on that.
Well, what I will say is that Trump has created this MAGA universe that I just saw a report this morning, 100% approval within MAGA. They approve of everything that he's doing, and it's gone from 28 to 30% of the Republican Party. So there is this core base, but he's done that by attaching that to identity, right? I mean, he's done his branding is very, very good. And he's been very successful at ensuring that it's not just, oh, it's politics, I'm going to vote when I vote, that it's like a lifestyle. And that is different than what we have seen in politics for a very, very long time. I do want to dive into another job that you have, because I think it's so fascinating. You were a global spokesperson and head of communications at the One campaign, which is the advocacy organization co-founded by Bono. How on the earth did that come to be, and what did that job entail?
So as I was on the Hill again for about 10 years, which doesn't sound like a long time, but it felt like dog years.
Like a million years.
70. And I felt like I was ready to leave and do something different, but didn't want to completely remove myself from the Hill. So the One campaign is an advocacy organization, which at its core means we're an organization that is fighting for like better policies or more funding or better funding for, and in this case, policies that help extreme poverty and preventable disease around the world.
Yep.
And to me, I was a little exhausted by being up on the Hill, and I thought this is my opportunity to do something new, and that genuinely felt motivated by like only good intentions, like really creative ways to get an issue that is not on the front burner in most politicians' mind, and demonstrate why it's a priority and how it can not only help save lives around the world and make people's lives better, but also enrich us here as Americans. And so, yes, I spent about 7 years there, and it was kind of a great opportunity to work on issues that span across the globe, to do some really creative campaigns. And it was a little bit of an exercise of thinking, okay, now that I'm on the outside, how do I influence the people that I was once working with or once working for. So a fun challenge in that, and that's kind of part of how DC works, is there's a lot of organizations that are trying their best and to advocate for different issues. And yeah, that this was one of them.
I mean, I would think just the global exposure that you would get from working on a campaign like that, of the countries that you were in, the things that you got to experience, and then also knowing that in a bigger sense, what good work you were doing, what the end results of that campaign. That's very exciting.
It was a really great experience to try to be creative and think about how to get some of these issues around global health or ways we can address poverty, whether that's education, clean water, a whole host of things, and demonstrate why they should matter for US politicians. But also, as you say, on that global scale of we can't just do this alone as a country. So making the case of why UK should stand up for this, why improving the stability and health of people in a country that you don't live in improves the stability and health of the whole world and people in your country. So a difficult case to make too, when people are focused on exactly what's happening in their neighborhood, and rightfully so. But it was an opportunity to kind of like stretch through and think how to take some of like the experience I had on the Hill and figure out how to elevate these issues and be strategic with getting some good things done.
Throw in the star power of Bono, and it gets a lot more attention than trying to go out and excite people on something that isn't on their radar from day to day.
Yeah, he's an extremely powerful advocate who, well respected on both sides of the aisle. And I actually remember when I was working for Speaker Ryan, him coming up and having a conversation with him, and the takeaway was, wow, he knows his stuff. He knows how to make an extremely persuasive case, and he really cares. And I think too, a lot of organizations are thinking through who is their most powerful spokesperson and advocate. And that's been a great phenomenon to see, because you really do need that to stand out with how much is going on the Hill on a day-to-day basis.
Wow, what a career you've had, Sarah.
Thank you.
And you're only in chapter 3. This is so cool. You've got so many more.
It feels like chapter 20, but I'll take 3.
You've got so many more crises to put out.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being on Frogmore Stew. I hope you'll come back if you have
I would love that.
some news or some things to share. We always love to talk to you.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
That's all the stew for today. Talk to you next week.